What caused the end of your marriage? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. I felt like a mother and I don't have children. Taking care of a man-child for 15 years was exhausting. Then I got really sick this summer with what was either massive ovarian cysts or ovarian cancer. I was hospitalized for days while waiting for the gyno-oncology surgeon to return from vacation to do an exploratory laparotomy, to remove the masses and biopsy them. In the worst pain of my life, terrified. And my husband was barely visiting me. Then he refused to take the day off work for my surgery. He could have, but he wouldn't. He'd have let me wake up to a cancer diagnosis without his support. Fortunately, the masses were benign, and I began the slow road to recovery. My sister took me home when I was discharged. To a dirty house my husband hadn't bothered to clean or change the sheets or anything. He continued to not take care of me. As soon as I was well enough to do so, I moved out and filed. Story 2. We were in an open marriage I knew nothing about. I was in an agreed-upon open marriage, but I was only allowed to date, not sleep with any other guys. He had full freedom to date and sleep with whomever he pleased, and he did. He'd guilt me into sex or touch me in my sleep when I wouldn't. Tried to convince me that my family and friends hated me, dissuaded me from getting a job, blamed me for his inability to get a good job. He wanted to be a cop, spread rumors about me to friends and his family, like that I was cheating, but never mentioned the multiple women he was seeing and sleeping with. When I had enough, he trapped me in the house, berated me, scared me enough to lock myself in the bathroom, told me I was worthless and everyone hated me, and I had to beg him to let me stay at my parents' to think things over. Packed up everything the following day with help from my family and filed for divorce. He remarried less than a year later and is a swinger now. Story 3. Coming home from a trip, my husband picked me up from the airport in my car. I noticed that the back window was cracked open. It was the kind of small triangular window that you have to crack open from the inside manually. I asked him who was sitting in the back seat. Without thinking, he said it was his best friend and the friend's wife. I asked, then who was sitting in the front seat? He laughed nervously and didn't answer. That was how I found out he was having an affair. Story 4. When I was growing up, there was a couple who lived across the street, Amy and Dean. Eventually, they sold their house and moved a couple of towns away. About a year later, I was saddened to see that Dean was killed in a car accident about 1/10 of a mile from his home. He had the green light, was driving through the intersection, and a car coming from the other direction didn't stop on the red and T-boned Dean's car. He died at the scene. Eventually, I married and bought a house in the town next to where Amy and Dean lived. To get to work, I had to drive through the intersection where Dean was killed. I was always very cautious when driving there because I would think of Amy and Dean. One day, I was waiting at the light, and it turned green. Something in my head told me to wait a couple of seconds, so I did. Sure enough, a white Volkswagen comes flying from my left-hand side, doesn't even slow down for the light, and goes sailing through the intersection. Had I gone right when the light turned green, that car would have hit me, just like what happened to Dean. Was it Dean's divine intervention? Who knows? I was definitely rattled afterward, though. Story 5. The sheer unwillingness to ever apologize and take accountability. Found out after we split, my ex threw stuff at our daughter and threw her into a wall when she was 4 to 5. She was always treated like second class next to her younger brother, and even took back seats to her friends and cheating partners. The type of mental, emotional hurt that girl was put through. When she just wanted her mom to love her. When I said something to the ex, naturally, I was the bad guy. But I can live with that. The ex was never one for accountability. Story 6. Secretly putting us into financial ruin. This was 2007, and we didn't have this term for it then, but he hid a lot of debt from me. When I left him after 7 years of deceit and hiding things, he called me a gold digger, despite being the only one to support us for all those years. I did actually feel bad at the time, like, am I a bad person for leaving someone who's literally never had a stable job and racks up huge debts in my name? But he never cared. I worked hard and struggled, and never spent any money on myself, while secretly he was maxing out credit cards left and right. So glad that nowadays people understand that is financial abuse, because at the time I kind of felt like the bad guy for not continuing to support his outrageous lifestyle. Story 7. Nothing really went wrong. Nothing really went at all. We had been dating for 7 years, so we thought it was a safe bet. Realized a year into our marriage that we were better as separate people. and it sucked. There were a ton of tears, a whole lot of begging not to let it end, a whole bunch of trying new things, living separately, splitting money, etc., so that we could be apart together, but it just didn't work. We were just live-in friends when it came down to it. And I think too that if we hadn't gotten married, we never would have seen it. It was sort of the impetus for us both to move on, as crap as that might sound. It was a shake-up in our otherwise completely humdrum stable life, and it ended up working out for the best, but it sucked for a long time. Story 8. My ex is bipolar, and he would often go off his meds cold turkey for funsies, wreck our lives, then get back on them and try to repair everything, and I was sick of the chaos. Coupled with him quitting his job, lying to me about it, and continuing to leave for work in uniform at the same time for months, I never knew where he was going. Then once he disappeared for several days, and neither he nor his family knew where he went. Turns out he went on a fishing trip with his friends and their wives. But he didn't want me to go. So he just never told anyone about it. So like I said, constant chaos, and I just couldn't deal anymore. Story 9. I went to work for 1/2 a day on my first day after maternity leave. My husband rushed out of the house kinda quick, said he was late for work. I checked on my 6-week-old son, and he had a bruise on the side of his face in the shape of a handprint. My husband hit him so hard he hemorrhaged the opposite eye. It took everything I had not to kill him. My biggest fear was I didn't want my son in foster care while I went through the process. I never saw this coming. He was always holding, feeding, changing him. Story 10. Married to his job, dating his computer, no time for his wife. We moved across the country for his job to a place I've never felt home at. I've been miserably homesick for nearly a decade, and he preferred where we used to live too, but wouldn't even consider a job change. Often he got home at 7-8 p.m. because he stayed late working. I was home alone 4 hours a day. He could keep the same schedule I did, just chose not to. Then he would want to watch TV or play computer games late, so I'd go to bed alone. Every night, for years. He wanted the money and the job, he got it. I want a life outside of work and a partner who actually wants to spend time with me. Story 11. 15 years here. First relationship too was a lot of built-up what-ifs and curiosities. Mine wouldn't do anything for himself and didn't even work for the longest time. Wouldn't cook, teach himself to cook, and he would tidy up, which took like 10 minutes. Couldn't find anything because he'd put things in random places, out of sight, out of mind. I worked full-time, so I would come home and have to clean and cook. I told him, and we discussed numerous times, he needs to pick up some slack. But his cleaning wasn't even cleaning. I'd have to do it again anyways. I told him I felt exhausted. I told him even though he spoils me in other ways, I need help, and I need to be a team. I don't want to feel like a nag. I don't want to feel like crap at home. If something needs to be done, just do it. Don't need me to tell you what to do. He'd be fine for like maybe a week and then back to old habits. So I built up a lot of resentment, regardless of how well he treated me on the regular. I would work a 12-hour day and he wouldn't feed himself, and if he did, it was a bag of chips or something quick from the convenience store. I just felt underappreciated. Not to mention our sex life went to crap because of this. It just fell apart. One thing I miss is we really were best of friends and got along well otherwise. Hopefully he grows up with whoever he is with next, or they don't mind and like that sort of dynamic. Story 12. There were a ton of things, but one thing that really did it for me. Story time. Our youngest was really ill. I took him to the emergency room 3 times. My husband complains about the cost each time and gaslighting me that I was overreacting. The 3rd time I had to carry him into the hospital, and our kid 7 finally got a chest x-ray, and within minutes we were in an ambulance. He had severe pneumonia. Looking back, honestly, he was actively dying. So after 4 IVs, breathing tube, pigtail tube to drain the fluid off his collapsing lung, x-ray after x-ray, CT scans, he finally turned a corner. But it wasn't a good prognosis. We were lucky. In the meantime, my mill came to help with our older child. She proceeded to get absolutely crap-faced every night she was here, a woman in her 70s, falling down drunk. I was so angry at her selfishness. Also, I missed my own mother's memorial service. Obviously, I had no choice, but it was still a blow. I wanted to be able to remember her with her sisters, see her face and hear her voice in them. Instead, I listened in on speaker from far away. This was on day 12 of my youngest being hospitalized, and we were waiting to be discharged. I was emotionally, physically, and mentally exhausted. and I just wanted to get my son home. As we were waiting for an available doctor to discharge us, my husband called and asked if he needed to be there for his child that barely pulled through on the day of my mother's memorial service, while his mother was there making everything harder. That he even asked that question galled me. It took me 3 trips to the car by myself, since after that long we had clothes and toiletries, blankets and stuffies, puzzles, games, books, etc. I couldn't look at my husband the same after that. Edit. Thank you, everyone, for your kind words and support. Means a lot. Story 13. Death by 1,000 cuts, really. She started coming home from work miserable every day, ranting and raving about every single perceived slight perpetrated against her. It was non-stop negativity from when she walked in the door through when she ate the dinner I cooked. I wasn't allowed to have friends she didn't know or approve of. It was very one-sided. She had to get off first, but rarely had the energy left to take care of me. Hated oral but insisted on it for herself. Total starfish. She was mean, just unnecessarily mean. To service staff and to me at home. She hadn't always been like that. But as we grew up, she changed. Anytime I expressed my feelings about this and how it was hurting my feelings for her, instead of making an effort to understand me, she just defended her toxic behavior and said that I was the one with the problem. We tried therapy, but she didn't take it seriously, and after a few sessions, she just said, "We're fine, right?" And yet, when I told her I was done, she was blindsided. Story 14. She said she was unhappy, didn't love me anymore, refused to talk further about it or go to therapy, and 5.5 months later, we were divorced. We had been together 23 years and have 3 daughters. At the time, I would have said our marriage was okay and typical. But in hindsight, it was a crap CO-dependent relationship, and we didn't have much in common other than our daughters. Both of us had unresolved childhood trauma, and both of us were at some point in our marriage. Ultimately, it takes 2 people to make the relationship work. I was willing to take a long, hard look at myself and address my faults and try to change. She wasn't. I could write an entire essay on this, but I think this sums it up. Story 15. My ex was in the army. Sometime during our 9 years of being married, he decided confiding in his battle buddies about his being unhappy in our marriage was a better choice than talking to me about it. Also decided sticking his dick in a subordinate was acceptable behavior. He figured once he asked for the divorce, he was no longer obligated to abide by our wedding vows, so started dating again. Funniest part is where after months of insisting and the changing his mind, then me finally agreeing to the divorce, I caught him red-handed, and then actually getting the divorce after all of that. We have had the official decrees in hang not even 2 full weeks, and he's asking me to take him back. Like, what? No. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your those in the comment below.